And how did you spell your name?
Daniel, Daniel.
You just go out for a walk, or?
Yeah, I
Is
live
that
here, and so I walked up, got some stuff at. Yeah, there's a
nice?
lady who owns a nut shop up there. I don't know if you've been. It's cool. I try to
No.
support her because it's it's a local
What's
business. I
what's the
think it's
shop?
called literally the Nut Shop. It's on
Okay.
on North Charles, where Charles Towers
Uh
is.
huh.
There's a little grocery store there. There's a lady who runs a nut shop. She's had it forever. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
We'll try and check
So
it out
yeah,
before I
you should.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Oh, so you're
local.
not from here?
David is
Okay,
not.
okay,
I'm from Columbia, so I'm pretty
okay,
close.
okay.
But
That's
yeah,
great.
I get out
Good.
every once in a while. But yeah,
Sounds
so
good.
it's helpful if we have a topic that you come up with,
Okay,
and it can be literally anything on your mind, or a lot of times it's helpful if there's like a truth claim to it, like an objective idea,
okay,
or I also have the question up of what you think needs to change is another
okay,
topic. So
okay.
yeah, anything that has been on your mind?
Sure. I mean, yeah. So if we want to talk a little bit about change,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, I think what most of us understand is that our country has become increasingly divided, and in fact, the world is increasingly divided.
Mm-hmm.
And
So the
my feeling is, regardless of
mm-hmm.
regardless of what group you may belong to, whether it's a political group or other, that it would be nice if people learned how to communicate again, to move us all forward.
Got it.
So I don't know if you want to talk about that, or we could go on to another topic.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So people need to be better at communication effectively.
Well, also too, just I feel like social media is pushing us all to network only with people who are similar to ourselves,
Mm,
and I think that's a problem, right?
right.
Yeah.
So this is stemming from social media uh, in a lot of ways. You feel like, is that
I mean, I also
the
think
case?
the politics of our country,
Okay.
right? And I think to some extent, I think people's lack of patience, right? So if I have a conversation with you and we disagree, suddenly I just want to cut you off. Where,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid, if you disagreed with somebody, like you might take a little space, but you'd always come back and try to find your common ground. Where I think these
Mm.
days people aren't interested in doing that.
And so have you encountered people nowadays that do that separate out and will completely disconnect if you disagree with them?
I feel like I'm fortunate in the sense that because I'm willing to kind of reach across the aisle, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
um, that I find that if I do that, people are willing to continue to have a conversation. Um, but friends of mine, family members, I sometimes see that because someone expresses a different opinion, that suddenly they stop getting together, right? So, like the example that you could use is like family members who used to play a sport together or go out to dinner together suddenly stop doing that
Right.
simply because the topic of conversation becomes uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I find that there are people who, at work, um, they'll be they'll be cordial,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have really any interest in getting to know a person if that person isn't aligned with their beliefs. And
Right.
my feeling is if you disagree with someone fundamentally, my thought is, well, then have a conversation with them, and you might enlighten them, and they might enlighten you. But if you're not having a conversation, the likelihood that either of you is ever going to change is pretty low, right? And then in the political arena right now, we see that playing itself out with the Democrats and the Republicans.
Mm.
That I think a lot of people are hardlined, and I myself belong to a party, and I typically would vote for my party and agree with my party's opinions. But if you happen to belong to the other party, I don't inherently assume that somehow you don't have any brain cells and can't think for like I just think that we disagree.
Right.
And I try to remind people of that there are people who just have different political beliefs, or same as beliefs in other areas of life. And I really am increasingly trying to encourage people not to just write somebody off because they think differently than you.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting because I just had another conversation earlier today with a person who felt that the other side politically were so uh, so dismissive of their ideas that it felt almost hopeless that they couldn't cross the aisle, as you say,
Right, right.
and that it was not, that there was no way for them to understand this person.
Right.
So, what do you think? What advice would you give to them?
Well, years ago, I had the pleasure of going to a 2-day workshop up at Harvard and MIT, and it was about managing difficult conversations.
Mm.
And I'll always remember this woman. She was a professor and lawyer, and she's done amazing things. She's helped to negotiate, international conflicts and things like that.
Wow.
And I remember her basic message was that until you can defend somebody else's position, you're probably not going to be able to have a conversation in which you could change their opinion,
Yes.
right? So that in other words, if I can't understand why you would think what you think, then it's probably unlikely that you'd be able to understand why I think what I think. And she gave some wonderful examples of that. But that really was, for me, a time in my life when it just opened up my eyes to the fact that if I so strongly disagree with you, I need to understand that opinion in order for me to rationally disagree with you. And on occasion, sometimes as I do that, I realize, well, there is a point that the other person had, and I would have missed that opportunity if I didn't go through this journey of like hearing their side, trying to figure out how might that be true. And many times I, remain at odds with the person intellectually. I still don't agree with you.
Right.
But I at least then can understand why you have that opinion. And so therefore I can continue to respect you as a person, even though I really strongly disagree with you on this.
When you were talking about us being in our separate social bubbles and not learning about the other's perspective, are there benefits to that?
Oh, sure. Sure. I mean, like if you're having a bad day, the last thing you need is to have an argument with somebody, right? And so I understand kind of that at some point there is the self-protection, especially if you feel that somebody is being aggressive towards you or even harmful towards you, right? So I'm fully aware that there are people who, when they get into those conflict situations, they feel personally harmed by the other person, right? And so I understand why a person wouldn't choose to go into a harmful situation. And a verbal conversation can feel like verbal abuse at times.
Yeah.
I really understand why people want to withdraw. But if you're doing that consistently, I would say, it's not always the case that this is harmful to you. Sometimes it actually could benefit you to hear an alternative view. And again, I don't mean that then you're going to necessarily change or the other person is going to change, but I think then you can learn to coexist with that person and respect that there are people who have a different opinion, and that doesn't make them inherently wrong or evil. It just means that we're different. And for those of us that embrace differences, right? Like I like the fact that when I go around in a city like Baltimore, we're not all the same. And I like if I travel internationally to learn about other cultures. So for me, the idea of somebody being different is an opportunity to explore. Yes, there are people whom I myself don't want to talk to because I just really don't like them. But if it's a person whom I'm going to be interacting with on a regular basis, I then try to find a way that we can communicate, right? If it's somebody I meet on the street, I'm only going to see them once, and I don't like that person because of something they said or something they did, sure, it's easy for me to just walk on by. There's probably little damage there. But if we work together or if we're in the same family, yes, there's a benefit to not talking to that person because we each then feel protected, but there's a harm in the sense that it oftentimes makes the rest of the group uncomfortable, right? Like I see in my family that like I'm uncomfortable if there are two people who just can't talk because I feel like that's a missed opportunity for both of them. And in my case, it might be two cousins of mine. I like both of those cousins. I know they don't like each other. And I think it's unfortunate, right? And I think every family has that where there's two people who just refuse to talk, and they have good reasons historically. But I remember my father once saying, oftentimes people don't even remember all the details for why they're not talking, right? And so it's one thing if there is something and you just cannot get past that, But in a lot of cases, it was an argument that wasn't really that monumental. And 20 or 30 years later, it seems like, well, there's been a lot of time that's passed over something that really probably wasn't worth 20 or 30 years of silence.
Do you see it sounds like you really value the diversity of opinions and perspectives that the disagreement brings.
Right.
Is it valuable to the point where you would invite people with opposing views into
Right.
your...
I mean, I come from a family, we like to argue, right?
Okay.
So, and in our family situation, it's just what we do, and so it's never personal.
Right.
So I have to remind myself sometimes that not everybody comes from that kind of a family where
Yeah.
they view arguments as like
A
a
positive.
fun
Yeah.
sport, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so I have to sometimes scale it back a little bit so that people don't feel that I'm judging them or attacking them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, part of it for myself is that I don't think I've learned everything I have to learn yet.
Yeah.
And so if I hang out only with people who agree with me, I have fun maybe, but I'm not sure that I'm growing as a person. And I find sometimes when I really get upset about something, and this could be with like a really good friend of mine who we get along, but suddenly I find that I'm so upset by something they said. And again, I've been taught by people who are smarter than myself that if you have that kind of a reaction, there's probably something about what they said that internally you believe, right? So if you criticize me for interrupting you and I get upset, it's probably because I talked a lot and maybe I should let more people have a little bit more time to talk, right? Or
so there may be a kernel of truth that's igniting your...
right. And you see this like in things like, if somebody says you need to lose weight, the person sometimes reacts and says, well, it's not like you're very thin yourself, right? And so I think people do have this natural tendency to go on the defense. And sometimes it's because, okay, I actually do need to lose weight. I am at risk of a heart attack or diabetes or something. And I know that you're right, but because it's hard for me to lose weight, instead of my saying, well, can you help me figure out how I can do that? Instead, I attack you back and say, well, you need to lose weight too, right? I mean, so it plays itself out in simple things or complex things, right?
And what would you say the best method of trying to understand people or get people to lower those defenses in conversations? What strategies
I always
would
say,
you use?
take people literally, right? And I think a lot of times we read much more into a statement than a person said. And so instead of my trying to figure out what did he mean by that or what did she mean by that, I try to just assume that people say what they mean. And so if you say something that I disagree with, to say, what I heard you say was, repeat back what I heard you say and say, here's why I disagree with you. But if you tell me, again, the simple one, like you need to lose weight, that instead of my saying, well, I'm quite happy in my relationship, assuming that you think because I need to lose weight, I'm not going to find somebody who wants to go out with me, like just to say, like, well, I'm trying to lose weight. Or, I understand that you would say that. And I do know that according to statistics, I probably am 10 pounds or 20 pounds heavier than doctors would say that I should be, but I'm comfortable with that, right? So just to respond in the moment to the literal thing as opposed to what you think the person was subliminally messaging you.
And if people were to use these techniques in conversations to try and have more disagreements, polite disagreements, or understand people better, do you think the country would be less divided then?
Well, I think so, yeah. I mean, the thing that I come back to is, again, like the two political parties. And I think a lot of people really can't believe that people would belong to the other party.
Yeah.
And my point is, okay, but instead of jumping to that conclusion, like, why don't we stick with, like, what is the topic that you're upset about, right? And in the current environment, there's certain things that just become an issue all the time. Abortion is one of them. The border between the US and Mexico is another one. The economy is a third one. And I think instead of people saying, like, well, why are you concerned about whichever of those topics or another one, and having a conversation about that. Instead, it's, I can't believe that you would belong to whichever
Right.
party I don't belong to,
Sure.
right? And so we find ourselves kind of talking about what's not really the real issue, right? So that like
it's almost like you want to keep the ideas separate from the identity,
right,
a little bit.
Because otherwise you label the person. Oh, I can't believe you're such an extreme liberal. I can't believe you're such a closed-off conservative, right? And I think that's what oftentimes happens is people then label the person instead of hearing like, well, wait a minute, don't like I for myself like I agree in general with the political party that I'm affiliated with, but there are some times when like I'm like I'm not sure. I oftentimes will still vote with that party, but I'm willing to say like actually I'm not sure I agree with that particular platform position.
And do you feel like you can voice those disagreements, or is there a space where you can share those disagreements, or do you feel like that's not always welcome?
For me, it's relatively easy because I'm okay that somebody will say, I totally disagree with you, right? I think for many people, what I see is that they just feel like, well, that's a stupid position, right? And if you're in that mindset where you're calling another person stupid, then the conversation just broke down, right? Like the minute you start calling people names as opposed to talking about the topic, that's when I just see so many people not able to participate in that. And I'm not saying I've never called somebody a name,
Sure.
but on a good day, I try not to then label that person just because they have a different opinion from me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so the way forward.
Interesting. Awesome.
That's great.
Well, I think that
that's great.
covers my questions. I really appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, I think it's great.
hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Feel free to.
Yeah, and I'm laughing too that I feel like what you guys are doing is exactly what I was talking about, right? Trying to like get people to yes,
You're speaking our language. That's right.
Nice to
Appreciate
meet
it,
you.
Daniel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.